Coming up here, it's kind of hard to believe this, but here in just a couple of weeks, we will reach a very important milestone in our relationship together. When the calendar turns to April, it will be 2 years that I have been here at Macedonia. Don't worry, I don't want to exchange gifts, I just want to spend the day together. But it's kind of weird to believe that in that time period that we've kind of cultivated this relationship together. In that time period that we've been here, and I've been here at Macedonia, I like to think that we've developed an understanding with one another that I'm going to be with you as transparent as I possibly can be about myself, my life, my family. I've likely overshared on more than one occasion, but when you get Brandon Bogue, you get Brandon Bogue. So because of that transparency that we've cultivated together, I don't feel any real hesitation in kind of peeling back the curtain for you this morning to let you know this sermon was really hard for me to write. Not because it's a weighty topic or it's something that I'm uncomfortable with or anything like that, but as we've been going through the 10 Commandments, if you've been keeping score at home, then you know that we're on the commandment of remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. The commandment that calls us to rest. This is a subject I'm not uncomfortable with. It's not a subject I'm unfamiliar with preaching to you about, because again, if you're keeping score at home, you'll know that it was just about 4 months ago we wrapped up a whole series on rest. And I felt like I had said everything I needed to say there. So when I approached this week's sermon, it was that thought in my mind of what do I say that's new? And I had a really hard time with it. See, most of the time, when I leave here on Sunday mornings and I get in my car and I head back home, my brain is already starting to think about next Sunday. I'm thinking about what I want to preach on. I'm thinking about what text we're going to be going through. I'm thinking about illustrations. Occasionally, I'm thinking of really great one-liners that nobody ever laughs at, but that's okay. I laugh at them, so that's what matters. But that's the thing, is on Sunday, I'm immediately thinking about it. By the time I get here on Tuesday, which is my first day here in the office, I've got a pretty good idea of where I'm going to go with the sermon. I may not have it all structured out, but I've got some really solid rough ideas. By Wednesday, I'm kind of organizing those rough ideas, thinking this is going to go here, that's going to go there, this is how we're going to land the whole thing. Because on Thursday, I actually start writing my sermon. I call Thursday my sermon writing day. But when it came to this particular subject today, knowing that I had just preached on rest a lot, not 4 months ago, and yet here we are on the commandment of rest. See, what the thing about it is that past Brandon decided that, yes, we're going to preach to the 10 Commandments. Yes, we're going to eventually hit the rest one, but that's going to be future Brandon's problem. I really hate past Brandon. He's the worst. But as we were coming through this, when I left last Sunday, it was the first Sunday since I've been here, I had no idea what I was going to be preaching on this week. I thought, it's going to be okay, because I've got till Tuesday. I can just kind of relax. It'll be fine. Tuesday rolled around, nothing. There's still nothing. By the time Wednesday came around, I was getting a little panicky, because I'm very much a creature of routine. I need my routines. It doesn't look like it from up here, but I'm a very organized individual. Don't look at my desk, because that doesn't convey that either. But I like things to be very organized and structured and routine and that sort of thing. So when the Wednesday came and I've got no ideas, I'm freaking out because tomorrow is sermon writing day. So I made it my point that Wednesday, as soon as I get in the office, I'm going to come up with something. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to figure this whole thing out. We're going to come up with this one. It's going to happen. And so I grabbed a pad of paper and I started just jotting down whatever came into my mind about rest. I got about 8 or 9 different phrases on there. And then I looked over them and I had to cross all of them out because they're exactly what I said 4 months ago. See, the thing about it is I don't like reruns. I'm guessing you don't either. And I felt like, because I love you and I care about you and I actually care about this stuff, I didn't want to give you something that was rehashed or reheated. Nobody likes leftovers, especially microwaved. It didn't feel fair to you. And to me, it felt kind of lazy. So I didn't want to do that. So all day Wednesday, I'm frustrated and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to say, because tomorrow I've got to type this thing up. Otherwise, my whole flow of the week is off. And if you don't believe me that it was frustrating, ask Peggy and JT, because it was just as frustrating for them because I wouldn't shut up about it. Spent the whole day. When I left here Wednesday after the girls got off the bus, still nothing. When I got home, I talked to my wife about it, because she's always a really good sounding board for me. And I kept throwing out, what if I did this? No, you said that already. Well, what if I did that? No, that's terrible. And we talked about it literally all through the evening until it got late and Mandy needed to go to bed because she has a job that requires her to get up very early in the mornings. And I decided I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep trying to work on this because I've got to get this job done. I've got to get this figured out. I've got to get this going so that hopefully at some point in time I can think about something other than this sermon. And I kept trying to work on it all throughout. And when I finally looked up at the clock at what I thought was Wednesday night, I discovered that it was 2 a.m. Thursday morning. I had to get up in 5 hours to get the girls ready for bed. Ready for school. I'm ready for bed. To get them ready for school, to kind of get going on their day. I had spent all this time working, trying to get this job completed, that I missed out on the sleep that I needed that night. I had missed out on my quality rest, thinking about rest. The irony is not lost on me that also this sermon on rest would happen to come on the one day a year that all of us are under-rested because of daylight savings, which is the dumbest idea anyone ever came up with. Ben Franklin came up with so many great ideas, and then he came up with one really bad one. I was working so hard trying to get the job ahead of me done. But isn't my predicament this past Wednesday something that all of us have a tendency to do? We all have this tendency to get wrapped up into whatever job is ahead of us. We have a tendency to get wrapped up in whatever work we have laid out in front of us. That we get so caught up in it that we end up costing ourselves the rest that we know we need to have. All of us have been guilty at some point in time or another of putting off rest because we've got things to do. Even what really frustrates me about the human brain, daylight savings, Patty, I'm going to get through this. It's going to happen. What really frustrates me about the human brain is that even when we're not actively working on something, what do our minds tend to think about? All the things we have to do, right? Like we may not be actively working on laundry, but we're thinking about how the laundry's piling up and we need to get it done. If you got a messy kitchen, you may not be actively cleaning it right now, but you're thinking about how you got to clean it when you get home or how you got to clean it later on. Even when we're not currently at work, we have a tendency to think about work. And this creates kind of a unique situation for us because it causes us to look at this thing that we call rest and to see it almost as a burden. It's kind of in the way. We know we need to do it. We know that it's something that's good for us. It's good for our mind. It's good for our body. It's good for our well-being. It's good for our self-care. We understand that rest is important to us. But when there's things that need to get done, when there's work ahead of us, when there are things around us that just have to be taken care of, we don't want to rest. For myself, whenever I'm doing like woodworking stuff, if I'm nearing the end of a particular project, the last thing I want to do is walk away from that project for an hour, let alone a whole day. We understand that as part of our makeup as human beings, and we're beginning to understand this more and more, the research that's being taken place on the study of rest is really interesting stuff. I highly recommend you read up on some of it. But we're beginning to understand just how much our bodies need that rest. We need that consistent sleep. We need that circadian rhythm of our rest and relaxation time because it's good for us. And yet, if there's something that needs to be done, we don't want to rest. I'll find myself in the mindset of once I get this done, then I'll take a break. I'll get my rest. I'll catch my breath. But as I'm working on that thing that needs to get done, my brain decides to remind me, oh, hey, when we get done with this, you also got this to do. Or, hey, this project that you're working on has just created 3 more projects for you. And it's just kind of stuck in this vicious cycle of constantly working and never really taking that time to rest. Is that rest in the midst of all these things that need to be done, it feels like a burden. Like it's harder to take the rest than it is to just keep working. And yet the notion of rest, as you are all aware of at this point in time, is something that God felt was really important by the time we got to today's command. Now, before we get to today's commandment, I think it's important that we backtrack a little bit. In fact, we're going to backtrack all the way up to Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Now, you may be thinking, well, Brandon got all hung up on the idea of preaching something he just preached on 4 months ago. Why are we suddenly going to a text we talked about 4 weeks ago? It's a good point. But it's really important that we talk about this particular text in the grand scheme of what we're talking about in this commandment today. Because Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3, talks about what God did after he finished all of creation, after he had made all of the plants and the animals and the sky and the sun and the birds and the turtles. Turtles. After God had finished all of this, it tells us what God did. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3, it says this: "So the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. On the 7th day, God had completed the work he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work and all that he had done. God blessed the 7th day, declared it holy, for on it he rested from all of his work of creation." After God had finished the act of creation, God chose to take a day and rest. Now again, this is one of those elements of this particular narrative that we don't tend to think of past the surface level, right? It's something that we all know, we understand, we've been learning it since we were in Sunday school at the age of 5, that on the 7th day God rested. So we don't put a lot of thought behind it. But do you consider the notion that God, the Almighty, the All-Powerful, the whatever adjective we want to give him in this particular notion, took a day and rested? It brings up a lot of interesting questions, at least in my mind. Questions I'm curious about. Questions like, what does God do on his day off? Does he go bowling? Does he golf? Does he do what I do and stay in his jammy jams eating Cocoa Pebbles and watching 90s cartoons? That's a great day off. Does he nap? What does God do on a day off? But the question that lingers most in my mind as I think more about this, the thing that I keep going back to, no matter how many times I try to get away from it, the question that keeps coming up in my mind is very simple, and yet it's anything but easy. Did God need to rest? On the one hand, it would kind of make sense. I mean, the creation process itself is a taxing endeavor. I mean, oftentimes if we're trying to be creative and trying to come up with different things and those sorts of things, it can be exhausting to come up with new ideas. And then the sheer force of energy that it would require for these things to come into existence, for him to speak and all of a sudden these things take place, that has to take place from some sort of source of energy. So it would kind of make sense that when God had finally finished all of it, yeah, maybe he needed some time to rest. But then on the other hand, this is God. This is again the Almighty, the All-Powerful. If he is truly almighty and all-powerful, why would he need to rest? No matter which way you slice it, this question, I think, is important for us. Did God need to rest? But this idea of taking that rest, this was clearly something that was important to God. He considered it to be important because it was so important that he set it as his commandment that we're going to read today in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. It says this, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You're to labor 6 days, do all of your work, but on the 7th is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who's within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. God viewed the notion of taking a day off, of taking a day of Sabbath rest, as so important that in one of the only times in Scripture we see God address an entire crowd of people. Remember, when we talked about this, is in Exodus chapter 20, God is addressing the entire nation of Israel. We've seen stories of God talking to individuals. We've seen stories of God telling certain people to go address other people. But this is one of the only times in Scripture God himself is addressing an entire nation. And he's telling him his most important things. And one of the things that is most important to God that humanity does is to take a day and rest. That tells me that God viewed this notion of Sabbath rest as something that was truly important to him. This is something that he knew needed to take place. But bear something in mind. Understand what the nation of Israel is doing right now. Right? They've spent the last several generations in Egypt as slaves. They are just now making their way towards the promised land. They are gearing up to become a brand new nation. Now, here's the thing. I've never actually been a part of setting up a whole new nation or a whole new country. But I can imagine it's probably a lot of work. Not just setting up the systems of government that need to take place, not just coming up with the different laws and the different rules and regulations and trying to figure out how you're going to play nice with the countries that are around you, but just actual physical work, right? You got to do things. You got to build stuff. You need to build your house. You need to build the businesses that are going to be around there. You need to build the other structures that are going to be important for this brand new nation as you set up. The work that's ahead of them is not going to take months. It's going to take years. It's probably even going to take generations to truly get this nation founded. And that's if they work every single day. And yet here's God commanding that they take 1 day a week off. If I'm honest with you, that's going to be kind of frustrating. Right? I mean, think about it. You've spent the last several years of your life camping. I don't know about you, I like camping, but not that much. And so you found your new nation, you've found your little plot of land, you've designed the house that you're going to build, you've started putting it up, you've got the walls ready, they're looking great, everything's coming together, but you don't have a roof. Oh, you're so close. But now you got to leave it alone for a day. You've spent the last several years of your life dreaming about this business that you want to start. You've planned it all out. You know exactly what kind of product you're going to sell. You know exactly how you're going to conduct business. You've got your rules and regulations figured out. You've got your sign that says no shirt, no shoes, no service. You're about ready to go. Everything is finally about to happen. This dream you've had for years is about to reach fulfillment, but you still got a little bit more to do. And it's the Sabbath. Can you see that? Can you see how frustrating that would have to be? To stop, to take a day off while you're in the midst of building, while you're nearing completion of it, while you're, again, whenever I'm getting close to being done with a project, I don't want to leave it alone for an hour, let alone leave it alone for a day. So the nation of Israel is kind of in a rock and a hard place type of situation here. Right? They got this work ahead of them. They know what all they need to get done. They know the things that have to happen, but now God has commanded that they take a day off. This command of God almost feels like a burden because it's going to slow everything down. It's going to it's going to make it to where they can't get all the work done. But they want to obey. So how did they respond? Well, they responded in the way that is probably the most human way anybody's ever responded to this sort of thing. Whenever something felt remotely like a burden, they turned it into even more of a burden. Right? We've talked about how different times throughout Scripture we see that they've come up with different Sabbath rules and regulations. And some of them are borderline ridiculous. Right? Like you can't sit down and write a letter because that's considered work. You can only walk so far in the day, otherwise you're working. There were even debates about whether or not you could eat an egg, a chicken laid on the Sabbath. Yet all of these rules and regulations, all of these things that got in the way, these were all man-made. They were not implemented by God. They were not part of Scripture that God had laid out for them. These were things that man came up with to take something that we already felt was somewhat of a burden and to turn it into even more burdensome. This command that God had already given us felt this way, and so we did the most human thing imaginable and made it more of a burden. Isn't that just like us? Isn't it just like humanity to take something that in no way, shape, or form was actually meant to be a burden and form it into a burden? To make it more cumbersome, to make it more difficult on ourselves, to take this thing that God gave us and make it harder. We've talked about in this particular series that the intent of the law itself, the reason why these commands were given, were in no way, shape, or form to stop us from having joy. Rather, this law was meant to make sure our joy remained uninterrupted. Right? These were the guidelines that God gave us to avoid sin. These were the boundary markers to keep us from doing the things that go against God. And yet, we turned them into a burden. See, God gave us this command for a very simple reason, a very reason that makes sense to all of us, because He loves us. Right? God understood more than we ever will. No matter how much study we do, no matter how much research is done on the subject of rest, we will never fully understand how much our bodies need rest any more than our great Creator will. See, He built us. He designed us. If anybody knows how important it is that we rest, it's God. God knew that our physical bodies could not withstand constantly going and constantly working and constantly getting things done. That at some point in time we have to stop and rest, or else we will collapse. We'll run into all kinds of different health risks. We'll run into all kinds of different emotional risks. At some point in time we'll snap. Isn't that fun? God knew that. And so as part of this law that He established out of love for us, He made sure to include the command to take one day to rest from your work, to not labor, but instead to relax. He did this for the simplest reason and most loving reason of all, simply because we need it. And frankly, that makes our response even more baffling, even more difficult to wrap our minds around. We took something that was meant for our good, and we turned it into another burden. We don't necessarily love the idea of a day of rest. Myself, I know, I have a tendency, even when it's my day off, I don't spend a lot of my day off actually relaxing. As a matter of fact, my day off is when I get things done around the house. That's when I go grocery shopping, because I like to go grocery shopping. Don't judge. That's when I get things ready to go for our meals for the week. I do some meal prep for us. That's when I get things like our laundry all cut up on. That's when I do things like fix some stuff around the house that's needed to be fixed. I don't take a day to actually rest. I just do work I'm not getting paid for. If you think about the grocery shopping work that I pay to do, wow, I really don't like that. Anyway, but that's the thing, is that we don't like to really rest. We don't rest well. We don't take this sort of thing. We don't do this. God didn't tell us to take a Sabbath rest to stop our progress or to cause us any sort of frustration. He did it because he knew we had a physical, an emotional, and a spiritual need to rest. But here's the thing. I think God knew that we would not be good at resting. I think God understood that this was going to be a struggle for us, that we wouldn't understand what it looks like to rest, that we wouldn't know how to really and truly stop our work for one day. I think God knew that we would need an example. See, I don't believe for one second that God actually needed to rest on the seventh. Just don't. I mean, he's God. But I think God did it because he knew we'd struggle with it, that we would think we couldn't possibly do it. We have this way of making ourselves more important than what we really are. Of saying, well, if I don't do it, it's never going to get done. I've uttered that phrase a lot more than I'm comfortable with in my life. And so God, to show us what it meant to literally stop working for one day to rest, did so himself. God didn't need it. He didn't need to stop for a day. He did it so that he could show us this can be done. That this is important. That if God could rest on the seventh, and he's God, then we can do it too. Then we can stop and rest. But again, instead of seeing this as a loving example to model ourselves after, instead of seeing this commandment as a healthy guideline for us, set by our Father who loves us, instead of rejoicing and resting in his love, we look at it as a burden, as a hindrance, as something that gets in our way. To that point, we made it even more of a burden. Understand, this law was not established to increase our burden. It was established to ease our burden, to make our lives a little bit more bearable. We have to stop looking at our need for rest as a burden and instead see it for what it really is, a gift given out of love. God established and commanded Sabbath rest because he knew we need it. That you and I, we physically need to have a day of rest. It wasn't made to turn into a burden. It was made to make our burdens lighter. We have a physical need for a rest. We have an emotional need for rest. We have a spiritual need for a rest. We can't look at that as it's something that slows us down. We can't look at it as something that's just getting in our way that causes us frustration. Instead, we should come to that day of rest with glad and cheerful hearts, knowing that our loving God instituted it for our benefit. Our rest is not in benefit to rest itself. Rather, our rest is in benefit to us. Jesus reminded us in Mark 2, verse 27, that the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.